Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. The details of the new CAP proposals post-2023 have been released in dribs and drabs through the media over the past few months. It's only recently the Department of Agriculture submitted the final proposals to the EU, which give a broad outline of Ireland's path for direct payments and environmental supports from 2023 to 2027. So now that there is a complete document of all the proposals in one place, the Teagasc Crops webinar on February the 3rd had a dedicated session looking at these new rules, and the questions and answer session from that is well worth listening to again. So we will first hear from Cormac McGann and Francis Moran from the Department of Agriculture, who will answer a number of questions around the new proposals. Fran answers the first question about the maximum entitlement value and what this includes. You mentioned there that there's a maximum entitlement value of €285 per entitlement. Is that excluding the top-ups, if you like, from the point of view of Eco Scheme and Chris on top of that?
Yes. So that's entitlement value only. Things like the Eco Scheme payment and so on, that's not included in that. Okay.
Cormac, just for you, you mentioned the AECM. There's two parts to that. One is a cooperation type scenario. If a farmer is in that area, is it mandatory for the farmer to participate in that, or can the farmer choose just to go with the standard AECM scheme, or none, as the case may be?
That's a great question. At the moment, coming into the scheme is voluntary, and the final details around whether or not it'll be only available to you if you're in for the cooperation project, the final details around whether they will have to participate in the cooperation project are still being worked out. We have done a lot of public consultation on this, and we're still sorting through the final details of that. The proposal that we shared back in November, where that it was going to be mandatory, but as Fran has mentioned, nothing is decided until everything is decided with these kinds of things.
Okay. Fran, I might go back to you. A question there about if a farm partnership has 2 or 3 members in it, does each of the partners have an individual cap of payments, or is the partnership looked upon as one unit?
Yeah, so this is a common question, and not only about the capping of payments, but also with things where it's payments where they happen on a per farm basis to a limit, like front loading and like ANC, for example. So the story here is that our guiding principle is that we would try to make sure that any farms who are in a partnership are not disadvantaged by being so. So where there are multi-herd partnerships, we expect that the limit will be per farm. If it's a single herd partnership, I think that will be different.
Okay. Another one, I suppose, around these type of cooperation agreements. What about share farm agreements that are in vogue at the moment? Do you think they will still be allowed going forward?
I actually don't know. I'll have to check that and come back to you if that's okay, Michael.
Okay. So I'd say somebody's still struggling to understand maybe the leasing of entitlements and clawback. You might maybe just quickly go over that maybe again.
Sure, no problem. So if you're looking to sell all of your entitlements without land in 2023 and 2024, there will be no clawback. So you don't lose that 20%. If you're somebody who doesn't want to sell and you want to, and all of this now I'm talking about 2023 onwards, there's no change this year. In 2023, if you're someone who doesn't want to sell, but you do want to lease your land and entitlements, if you're leasing out more than 80% of your entitlements for less than 5 years, there will be a clawback of 10% per transaction. So let me give you an example on how that would work. Say I have 10 entitlements and I lease out all 10 of them to a neighboring farmer, and I do that for 1 year. What will happen is that farmer will receive 9 entitlements, and when the lease ends or the rent ends, you will get 9 back. You will have lost 10% or 1 entitlement. If you repeat that the following year, you'll lose another 10%. The recipient farmer would get 8.1 entitlements, and so on and so on. However, if you started with your 10 entitlements and you leased them out for 5 years, you won't lose any. So basically, it is encouraging you towards 5-year leases and longer.
Okay. Okay, well, we're just going to take two more questions before we kind of move on, because we are going to return to lots of these questions. There's lots of questions coming in. One is around, and I'm not sure, Cormac or Fran, which one you might want to take, is can a farmer opt out of eco schemes on leased or rented land?
So absolutely, yes, eco schemes are voluntary for farmers. You don't have to take part. Of course, if you don't take part, then you don't get paid for them. So it will be, so when you're doing your application in, coming up to May 2023, you will have to say, I am doing eco schemes on all of these parcels. And you'll have to say what the eco schemes are. And you can decide not to do them, but obviously the money then reflects that.
Okay, so it's not a whole farm approach. It's on more an area based approach, really. Whatever you put in. Okay, and the last one I'm going to ask you there is there's a farmer here who has he's a farmer with no entitlements at present, and he's wondering how will he be treated from 2023 onwards, and he just comments that he's not a young farmer at the moment. Okay,
so essentially that person's situation would be unchanged. So there's no new allocation of entitlements. So, I mean, they are free to rent entitlements, to buy entitlements, whatever, but they may not want to do that. However, it's important to know that there's quite a bit of, right now, a lot of payments are dependent on you having entitlements. So for example, greening is paid as a percentage of your entitlement value. Young Farmer Scheme is paid on top of entitlements. In the new CAP, there are significant changes there, and you can apply in as a BIS entrant with no entitlements in 2023 and receive the eco scheme payment on your land that you carry out the eco scheme actions on, and also you can receive the front-loaded payment on your first 30 hectares. If you were a young farmer, I know they said they weren't, but if you were a young farmer, you could also receive the young farmer's payment on up to 50 hectares without having entitlements. So, there are options. So there's a kind of a shift away from having to have an entitlement as a basis for these other payments.
Okay, so you don't even need one entitlement in the first place. You can just apply through the system without any entitlements at all.
You can be a BIS entrant without entitlements.
In the next session, Clive Carter, a farmer from Laois, was joined by his Teagasc advisor, Veronica Nine, a tillage advisor from Laois. Clive started off by answering a question about how the final rules can be tweaked to help tillage farmers.
Yeah, as you said, I've been on the CAP Consultative Committee with the Irish Grain Growers Group for the last 2.5 years of that there now. So I have been feeding in a few bits. I just got the plan last night, so I was just reading it a bit there today. Yeah, look at obviously the convergence and the CRIS are going to hit the tillage farms the worst. That's a given. I think the department acknowledged that back in the summer, that tillage farmers were going to be the worst hit. The eco scheme measures, we did push strong to get a few measures. And just looking there now, the expanded crop rotation measure is 20%, including a few crops. And there is soil sampling, or not soil sampling, limited nitrogen reduction measure for tillage farmers too. So it is a help. The area I see going forward with the potential is Pillar 2, and also the strong corporation measure and the protein aid scheme. To see an increase of nearly 4 million in the protein aid scheme is a big help, and the strong corporation measure too. But look, at these things aren't going to make up for the loss of income we're going to hit.
Yes, absolutely. And I suppose in that vein, Veronica, you're seeing an awful lot of, similar farmers in around Clive coming in and out to you. How do you think, in a general sense, that's going to be, affect, I suppose, the real tillage farmers who are, I suppose, commercial tillage farmers who generally are much bigger than your typical average farmer out there?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of leased ground on people are farming high levels of leased ground up here. We've kind of a very rapidly growing dairy sector in the area, so the land price has increased a lot over the last couple of years, which means that most leased ground now has an entitlement value built into the land price. That is the value it is today and this year. So that's going to drop substantially. I think all recent leases would have a built-in review to happen around this time. So hopefully that will allow farmers to maybe adjust the land price accordingly, because really you can only guarantee a BIS payment going forward. Also, I suppose from the leaseor's perspective, if it's a case you're holding ground for a successor that's not ready, you'd have to move to a longer 5 to 6 year lease. And if you're not looking, the clawback, the 20% loss from the sale of entitlements for 23-24 has to be something that you have to consider strongly, because the reality is the price of these entitlements, or what you're getting today, is only going in one direction if you're at a high value entitlement.
Okay. And Veronica, just to ask you in terms of the greening is now ending back up in the conditionality bit. So essentially farmers have to do that before they can claim anything. But there's an enhanced scenario there. Do you think that in your area around the kind of the leash area, will that be relevant, if you like, and in around your area, or is that going to be, will farmers have to look at something different?
You're talking about the eco schemes, is it?
The eco scheme end of it, the additional bits, yeah. I
think a lot of the farmers the spectrum is wide. There are some farmers who have struggled to comply with the EFA requirements under greening to date, and there are others who are well over it. I think a lot of farmers like Clive would be hoping to get the 7% for space for nature, if not even the 10%. The crop rotation and enhanced diversification is going to be an obvious choice, but I would just strongly urge anyone who has no experience with these break crops to maybe talk to their advisor, because, if you've been using cover crops with brassicas, or if you've dry ground, they may not suit. And look, the reality is with fertilizer prices, it might be a good year to put a small little bit of ground to a legume. They have a low fertilizer requirement, and if you dip your toe in the water this year, it might be a good time to do it, to get a bit of experience, because if you're going for that, 20% is a lot of ground.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and just on the space for nature, Veronica, the day you were out filming with us, that morning I mapped the whole farm, and we're just barely on the 7%. So I think a lot of farmers will have to have a little bit of flexibility too, that they're not going to get caught. Aim a little bit higher for space for nature, just in case.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Clive, I'm just going to finish up with you in this kind of question session. You were probably in a very strong position to, I suppose, add up your own entitlements, or the value that you're going to get back out of the new scheme, to kind of see where you are. And I presume, like most tillage farmers, you're going to be down quite a bit of money. Have you thought about that in terms of how you're going to replace that money, if you like, on your farm, in terms of keeping your income steady?
Yeah, look, it is going to be a good bit of a hit. I don't know. I'm just going to have to manage it, really. As I said, maximize the strong corporation measure, the Pillar 2 funding, and the AECMs, or the AECM scheme, which I haven't seen the details of yet, but I'm interested to see. That's the only way I see of getting it back, because look, at input costs are going through the roof, and the price of grain isn't really matching it.
In this session, we'll hear from Kieran Collins, a tillage specialist in Teagasc, who answered a question on how entitlements will be treated as an individual or as a whole from 2023.
Yeah, I think the way I understand it, and the department lads will I'm sure clarify, but each set of entitlements will converge separately. But in the leased-in scenario, I suppose the critical piece really is that the CRISC will only be claimed once. So again, that reduces the value of those entitlements. And I suppose the same in relation to eco scheme, whether it's claimed or not, or as I said there in the presentation, there will be costs involved to draw down some of those. So I think the message really that I'm getting from this is that we need to relook at the value of entitlements where tillage farmers are leasing them in.
Okay, so it's not so what you're saying is it's not a single value as we would have known in the past, whereby it's my BPS plus greening on top. That's the value, and this is the value I would like to get back for renting out that entitlement. What you're saying?
Yeah, certainly it is a new value. Yeah, without a doubt.
Okay. And then when you talk about the eco scheme, it's from my understanding and from what you were saying there, is that yes, it can be claimed on all that ground, but it doesn't necessarily have to if it's not suitable. And where do you think that might go in terms of returning that value, if it's ever going to be returned back to the landowner?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, because look, we've seen the examples that the income from the basic payment will reduce. So I think all tillage farmers will endeavour certainly to draw them down. I think that makes sense. whether they're drawn down, it's going to apply to the owned and the rented land, So again, I suppose for the leaser of entitlements, I suppose they need to be aware that maybe not in all cases they might be drawn down for whatever reason. And I suppose the other one is just the cost then, maybe if somebody is going to invest in, a fertilizer spreader or a sprayer or something like that, that there are costs involved. So again, as I say, it will alter the least in value of the entitlement.
Okay. And you went through those examples there, and you kind of got down to a final number. And I know you mentioned it already, but you might maybe highlight it again, that's not the final figure. And I suppose to a degree, it's relatively straightforward for farmers to calculate that themselves as regards taking off the percentage. But the final figure you came up to, there's still a bit more to come off the bottom of that.
Yeah, just to re-emphasize that one, that the figures I gave there, are prior to convergence. So obviously for the higher value entitlements, that is going to be more severe. And I suppose I should say, and I used two examples there where the value was decreasing. Obviously, farmers with low value entitlements, obviously convergence is going to work the other way in their favour. But I suppose the reason I picked those examples was they're based on the National Farm Survey, the kind of average tillage figures, which tend to have a higher entitlement value overall.
For the rest of this question and answer session, Kieran was joined by the previous speakers and also by James MacDonald in Teagasc and Michael Maloney from the Department of Agriculture. The first question was answered by Fran around the reference value of entitlements that will be used for convergence.
Okay, so the average entitlement value today is in or around 182, 183 euro. And in the new cap, we think that the average entitlement value will be somewhere north of 155 euro, 155, 157 euro, there or thereabouts. That's what the average will be. The reason for the uncertainty is that we won't know that until later on this year. So that's why I'm being a little bit cautious, but within a few euro of that, we think.
Okay. There's a question here, Cormac, I might ask this to you, where there's a question around front loading of those payments, as in the CRIS payments. And the comment is that's probably going to end up in the pockets of armchair farmers.
Where the concerns around armchair farmers match up with what we've proposed in the cap is a much more robust check, an administrative check for the active farmer. If you're in receipt of cap payments, you're going to be asked to demonstrate how you're taking the agricultural risk and the economic risk for the land that you're claiming on. How that would work for a tillage farmer in particular, as this is a tillage seminar, you'd be asked, a sample of farmers will be asked to produce receipts in their name, or a valid share farming agreement to demonstrate that they're the individual assuming that agricultural and economic risk. So that's how we'll hopefully do away with any cohorts of armchair farmers that still exist.
Okay, thank you. I have a question here as regards there's where a father and son are currently farming two separate units and have two BPS applications. And the question is really around the front loading in terms of the father transferring more of the land and entitlements back across to the son. Is that a disincentive?
So just let me go back over the question again. So you've got a partnership with two people in it who both are their own separate entities, and they're looking at transferring between one to the other. And in doing so, one ends up with more than 30 hectares or 30 entitlements. Yep. Yeah, so absolutely the front loading will possibly affect them in that situation, and they need to take that into account in making their arrangements.
Okay. There was a mention there of Clive, you mentioned it there that you reckon the arable grass margins are going to suit you and your farming system, and you had a question there around the different payments between that and the grassland grass margin, I suppose, if you like. And I suppose there is a question there around why are there different payment rates for both of those, since I suppose the land are in for the same purpose, if you like. Maybe Clive, you have a comment, and I might maybe come to maybe Michael Maloney maybe after that.
Yeah, no, it was just something I saw in one of the preliminary plans going forward. I haven't seen it on the one that we got the other day, but yeah, the margins for arable was, I can't remember the payment off the top of my head, but it was significantly less for a grass margin in an arable field versus a grass margin in a grassland field. And there was another one to include fencing. So I just don't know where the differential in the price came. It seemed to punish tillage farmers a little bit more.
Michael Maloney, do you have a comment on that?
I suppose I do and I don't. First of all, it's an AECM, so I don't deal with AECMs as Johnson Castle, but I do know that, we'll say in particular when we were dealing with the strong cooperation measure and contributing through eco schemes, all AECMs, all Pillar 2s are based on the principle of cost incurred, income forgone. So what I would presume happened in this case is they would have looked at, we'll say, the average tillage gross margin and compare that across, we'll say, the average livestock gross margin and based your cost incurred, or in this case income forgone, because you're setting aside a margin as such. It's on that basis, I suppose, and they would probably have taken an average of the gross margins across all the livestock, and of course the dairy gross margin would have pulled that up. That's the only explanation I can give, Clive. We can certainly talk to Johnson Castle and get a more definitive answer for you.
Okay, and apologies, I neglected to introduce Michael Maloney from the Department of Agriculture, and we're also joined by James McDonald from Teagasc, the financial specialist from Teagasc, just to round it off. And Michael, actually, as you're there, and sorry, we've John Joe Byrne as well from the department as well. As you're there, there's a question in there as regards miscanthus. Will that be finally regarded as a crop and not space for nature or an EFA?
I'd have to check that out for you. It's again, if it's on the list of crops already for BIS, well then that would continue into the, or BPS currently it'll go into the BIS. But I'm not sure in what regard, for BIS or for what other scheme are you referring to?
I suppose to bring it in as a crop, I think, Michael, is what the question was really around. Crop the same as wheat or barley.
Okay. We can check that out.
Look, there's probably colleagues from the department. There's a good few questions coming in, and a lot of them are around a similar kind of vein. That and certainly from Kieran's talk there, the tillage farmer is going to get hit very strongly by these new regulations, and maybe you might have a comment maybe as regards where you would see tillage farmers going in the future, because I certainly know that there is in some of the other strategic plans, I suppose, a general plan to maintain the area of tillage land in Ireland.
Okay, so I suppose do you want to take that, Mike?
Okay, Fran, you can back me up if I miss anything. Look,
sure.
I suppose, yeah, I think there's winners and losers, as would say, Fran and his colleagues would confirm in relation to this. High value entitlements, those people are losers. People around the average, I think Fran has highlighted, they're largely going to be unaffected. In relation to tillage, there's a number of dedicated measures that Fran and Cormac have gone through, such as the strong cooperation measure. It's a dedicated standalone measure worth 50 million over the next, and if you include 2022 and 2021, it's worth 70 million to tillage farmers. The protein aid has been more than doubled again, and it's the only coupled payment out there in relation to all the various schemes. There's no coupled Pillar 1 payment for dairy, beef, sheep. It is the only one that's there, and it's more than doubling, and it will give a degree of certainty to people who want to grow protein crops, and will take the fluctuations out of the price. It is acknowledged we need a stable tillage sector, and we've gone through a number of years of decline, up to 50,000 hectares in the last 10 years as such, but in the last I would say nearly 3 to 4 years, we've seen a stabilization with even an increase into tillage area in 2021. I think 2022 is going to be somewhat similar in relation to area, but it's going to be a difficult year in relation to margins, but hoping that that's only going to be a 1 year, I suppose, in relation to the unprecedented fertilizer prices. It is a valuable sector. It's got the best emissions profile of all the sectors out there. And we have to acknowledge there are going to be losers in respect of the cap, but we would encourage people to look at the schemes that are out there. As I said, you have a dedicated Pillar 1 scheme in protein aid. You have a dedicated Pillar 2 in relation to SIM, and also in addition to that, tillage farmers have a second bite of the cherry in relation to the general AECM measure with a max payment of 7,000. And there is, a raft of options inside there, such as min-till. I think Clive talked about cover crops. There's over 20,000 hectares in cover crops currently. We'd like that to see that figure to go to 50,000 hectares. So certainly it is, the nitrates regulations will also impact indirectly, maybe in relation to tillage, in that it may, put a bit more heat into the Connacht or rental market. Again, it's something that we can't, adjudicate over, but certainly I think that, in relation to the climate change, there's a lot more of the game to play in relation to that. And I think that's a space where, the tillage sector has an important part to play in it.
Okay.
And I think the short answer is there is a viable future for tillage in this country.
Okay, thanks, Michael. James, can I bring you in for a second? I kind of have two questions, and I'm going to bring the department in after that. There's a number of questions in there as regards for farmers who are leasing out entitlements and now they want to sell those entitlements. Is there capital gains considerations to be taken into account there? And maybe you might have a comment and go to the department then after that, in terms of, is there any way those farmers might be able to stack those entitlements back rather than losing those entitlements? James, maybe I'll go to you first.
Yeah, okay. So as entitlements are looked on by revenue as a capital asset, the same as a tractor or a piece of land. So if you sell or transfer a basic payment entitlement, there is a capital gains tax due on it. So I suppose it depends on whether you establish them yourself. If you establish them, they come in at a zero value. If you receive them as a gift or purchase them, they have a value that they arrived into your account at. So when you go to sell them, it depends on whether it's a zero value starting off, or if they came in at a market value into you, the capital gain would be less. So the rate is 33%. So I suppose in looking at the clawbacks and, reducing the administrative burden around, moving people towards long-term leasing, that's a good thing. But I suppose the other side of it is trying to move entitlements from inactive farmers to active farmers. If the person wants to sell, there will be a taxation due. So that's a little bit of a disincentive. But I mean, I suppose there's farm organisations making, submissions to the Minister for Finance and Revenue to remove that. We had that back in 2014. So I suppose it's all up to play for yet. And I suppose the proposals are still only proposals. So it's after that then that the rubber will hit the road as regards, any changes in the tax. So there's pros and cons to what's happening. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, James. Just in terms of stacking, maybe Fran, is there potential for that? So as people who are leasing out entitlements on a yearly basis don't lose them as you outlined earlier?
Yeah, so the answer on that is clear, but unfortunately not what some people might like. So there is no stacking available within the next cap. So it's not possible. It's not provided for in the regulations, and we won't be able to do it. So there won't be any stacking or consolidation in the new cap.
Okay, so the only option there for leasing on a yearly basis is go to a 5-year basis to, I suppose, protect those entitlements.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
exactly. Yeah.
Cormac, could I come to you? And there's a question here as regards existing scrub areas, or maybe the red line areas as would have been there in the past that were excluded from the BPS. Are they coming back into the application now, and where can they be used?
So our proposal that we submitted to the Commission is that up to 30% of a parcel could be made up of these scrub or space for nature type of areas and still be eligible for certain types of payments. So the fine detail on that is still to be finalised, pending comment from the Commission. But our hope is that some of those red line areas will come back in. Based on our current modelling, we'd estimate that that'll introduce about 55,000 hectares that are currently ineligible into the pot.
Okay, and actually, as you're there, Cormac, there's a question here around forestry. A person saying they have forestry, so will the environmental payment be paid on forestry land, and also other payments being discussed for tillage? I'm not sure what that is, but how does forestry treated in the new system?
I'm afraid I'm not an expert on the forestry side of things. I don't know if someone else has a better background on it, but my understanding is that certain areas of forestry will be eligible, and there are exemptions for forestry for some types of land. But I will probably prefer if you'd submit those comments maybe to Teagasc, and we can get them answered for you properly.
I'll just make a quick comment, Michael, if that's okay.
Sure.
Currently, there's different types of forestry, but forestry that was planted on eligible land in 2008. So if forestry was planted in 2009 or afterwards, that land is eligible to draw down basic payment entitlements. So the question I reckon has been asked, if that land can draw a BIS payment, can it get an eco payment, is probably the direction that the person is asking. So I don't know, Cormac, if you know the answer to that. And then forestry pre-2008 was always ineligible, and I assume that will continue.
Fran may correct me, but my understanding is that if a hectare is eligible, it can receive an eco scheme payment. All eligible hectares are entitled to receive an eco scheme payment. So the answer is yes.
Okay. Thank you, Fran. I just wanted to come to you in terms of, and again, we're talking about, I suppose, the future of tillage just a few minutes ago, but you did mention along the way that the Young Farmer Scheme will be beefed up, I suppose, if you like. So you might just maybe go through that a second time. Am I right in my understanding that the young farmer will get entitlements that they'll keep in the longer term, but they'll also get a top up over the years, which is a pretty significant payment, I think, as you outlined?
Sure thing, yeah. So there's essentially two different things that a young farmer can apply for here under direct payments. So the first is the National Reserve. And from the National Reserve, a young farmer, qualifying young farmer, can obtain an allocation of payment entitlements. So those entitlements would be theirs then to do with, to claim each year and so on. The same as any other farmer then who has entitlements. Those entitlements are given out at the national average value. So they would receive those on whatever eligible hectares up to a maximum that they might have. We are proposing that there would be a restriction. So when a young farmer gets an allocation of payment entitlements, that they would not be then able to transfer those payment entitlements for 5 years. So in other words, that they show some commitment for the valuable resource that's being given to them for those 5 years. They don't just sell them the following year, for example. Not that that's widespread or anything like that anyway, but just that kind of shows commitment to farming. So that's one. The second thing then is, and that's a permanent support for as long as we have payment entitlements and direct payments and so on into the future. The second one is the Young Farmer Scheme. There's a new name for that, complementary income support for young farmers. And that sees a payment for a maximum of 5 years paid to a young farmer per eligible hectare. So at the moment, that the Young Farmer Scheme is paid, it's about €68 per activated entitlement. So you have to hold entitlements to be able to get the young farmer's payment, and there's a limiting rate. In the new cap, that changes, and changes very significantly, in that the link is not to entitlements anymore, it's to eligible land. So it's paid per eligible hectare to the young farmer, up to a maximum of 50 eligible hectares. And the rate will also increase. The rate, the regulations have stipulated that there's a minimum of 3% of the ceiling allocated to this each year. That equates to about 35 million. And while that is dependent on the number of young farmers who apply, the number of hectares they declare, we expect that there will be a significant rise in the rate per hectare compared to the rate per entitlement at present. We think that will probably go to somewhere north of €160 per hectare. Quite a substantial increase in payment for those who are looking to take up farmer, and that would be for a 5-year period. And just to before the question is asked, if someone is already in the Young Farmer Scheme and are a continuing applicant, then they can continue seamlessly onwards into the new cap. So essentially, the old applicants get paid the new money, if you like, as they proceed on.
Pay the higher payment.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Look, we are rapidly running out of time. I'm just going to ask one other question, and it's to Veronica. Veronica, you mentioned along the way that lease, that land rental is obviously a large part of your client's business. And there's a question in here around if you're signing a 10-year lease agreement in 2021, what changes should you put, I suppose, what should you put in place as regards that lease agreement to make sure that you're reasonably protected for the new rules that's coming through?
Well, I suppose for this year, I probably would be recommending people enter into a 6-year lease, because that way you're covered for the long-term leasing tax-free income, and the stamp duty is removed. And it also lines you up for the next cap reform, so that the lease, it'll cover you from the clawback of entitlements under the new cap, and prepare your lease will probably finish just as the new cap is coming in, because we're not 100% sure what's coming with that. I suppose that's what I'd be suggesting going forward.
Okay, thanks, Veronica. Final question, maybe to one of the departments. Michael, you wanted to come in there, did you?
Yeah, just going back onto the miscanthus, we just checked it out. Currently under BPS, it's eligible for both ANC and BPS. So it is an eligible crop, if that's the question that's been asked. And that would, I don't see any change in the list of eligible crops going forward. I don't anticipate any anyway going forward under the base. Fran might be able to confirm, but we'd have no reason to change it. So it's currently eligible for both ANC and BPS.
Okay. Okay. Very last question. I'm going to ask it to one of the departments, maybe Fran. In terms of a calculator for people trying to figure out what they're going to do going forward, or how their payments might look going forward, are the department going to produce one, and when would the industry likely to see that?
Okay, so we're in the planning of that at the moment. We are anxious to provide one as early as possible, so that people can see how their payments might be affected in the future. But I don't have a date yet for that being implemented. The thinking at the moment is that one will be available on our website. So you'll be able to go to the website and put in the number of hectares you have, the number of entitlements you have, and their current value. And you'll be able to see payment today versus payment in the future. But we're just a little bit away from that. So we're working out some of the technical details in the background. We overcome those. We hope to have it up reasonably quickly.
So that was a very long session, and thanks very much to the panel for answering all the questions in such a clear and precise manner. So that's it for the Tillage Edge, and if you have any suggestions about topics you'd like to hear about, just drop me a line on michael.hennessy@teagasc.ie or on Twitter @teagascrops. We always want to hear from farmers and people in the industry about what interests them, so do get in touch. There are a number of events coming up in the next few weeks, and next Thursday, February the 10th at 11:30, we will focus specifically on malt and barley. As the restrictions have eased a bit, Teagasc are now going to hold a series of regional walks across the country starting in the middle of February. I'll give you more details closer to that at the time. All of these events can be found at www.teagasc.ie/tillage month. Finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed this podcast, and recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.